In the first and second days of training, you learned how to request data from the server to use in your application. In this video, you will learn how to send data to the server using the Flex RemoteObject component. You will also handle the confirmation message from the server that returns the record ID for the data that was inserted into the database. In this Flex in a Week training, I am assuming that you are watching the videos in order, which means that you have already watched the introduction to the HTTP service component video on this third day of training. If you have not, you might want to consider watching the first 4.5 minutes of that video. In that section, I orient you to the topics you have learned that prepare you for sending this data to the server. If you watch the web service component video, also on this third day of training, then you will find many similarities with RemoteObject. In this video, I will use the RemoteObject component to send the form data as a parameter to the server. When I submit the form, the confirmation message displays the ID for the record that was inserted into the database. In the declarations block of the starter file, I already have one RemoteObject component instance. I'm creating a second RemoteObject instance to send the data back to the server. I'm giving it an ID property with the value of vehicle service. I'm adding the destination property with the value of cold fusion. You learned on day 2 that the destination value is configured in a configuration file on the remoting server. For a cold fusion server, the value is cold fusion. Remember that although we are using a cold fusion server for this training series, you can use any backend technology like Java, JSP, .NET, or PHP that has an AMF compatible server. I'm adding a source property with the value of F4 IAW100.remote data.employee.data. This dot notation path points to the Cold Fusion CFC that will accept the data. I'm adding an endpoint property with a value of this URL. This property is not necessary if your Flex application is on the same server as the remoting service. Since this Flex application is local and pointing to a remote service, we need to define this endpoint. Lastly, I'm adding the result event and using Flash Builder to generate the result handler. The two ways to pass arguments to the server-side method calls through RemoteObject are parameter binding and explicit parameters. Parameter binding allows developers to predefine the source data for arguments that will be passed to the server-side methods. This technique is only available if you use the RemoteObject MXML tag. You nest an arguments MXML tag within the method MXML tags of the RemoteObject tag block. All arguments are placed in ordinal position, not by name. To call a method and pass the defined values, use the RemoteObject class's send method. When using explicit parameters, you add the arguments to the method call in the same order that they are defined in the server-side method. Note that the argument is defined as an object name-value pair. This is the way that I will send the data to the server for the company vehicle request form. I have debugged the application so that you can see the vehicle request data value object in the event object that is passed from the custom component. I'm stopping the debugging session and then returning to the Flash perspective. In the event handler for the custom component event, I'm adding the vehicle service dot add vehicle request method to send the data to the server. This method is expecting the data object, and I am passing it the event.vehicle request data. I'm saving the file. I'm enabling the network monitor and then running the application. You can see that the first remote object call retrieves the data for display in the drop-down list control. I'm filling out the form. As I submit the request, you can see that a second service request is made. When I look at the Request tab, you can see that there is a Parameters node. When I drill down into that, you can see the data object that is being sent to the server. On the Response tab, I'm drilling down into the response body to see the server is returning the vehicle request object. Note that it is doing that because I have mapped the server-side vehicle request object to the Flex vehicle request object by using the remote class metadata tag in the vehicle request value object. You must do this to strongly type your client data to the server data. Notice that the object that is coming back from the server contains the ID property for the record that was inserted into the database. It also contains the add status property, which lets me know that the record was added successfully to the database. Back in the main application, I have added a conditional statement to test for the add status value. I'm displaying the record ID property in the success statement and an unsuccessful message if the add status value is not true. I'm running the application. Then I'm filling out the form. When I submit the form, you can see that the record ID for the inserted data is successfully returned. For your next step, work through the exercise titled Passing Data to the Server with RemoteObject.